Good afternoon and welcome to our August webinar titled How to Consistently Select Future High Performers. My name is Mark Perbrick. I'm the Managing Director of PeopleLogica and Multi-Rater Surveys. Bit of housekeeping before we start. Please feel free to engage via any of our business and social media sites. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you next week. The recordings of all of our webinars can also be found on our peoplelogica.com and multiratersurveys.com websites. So that we can finish within the 30-minute time frame, if you have any questions, please post them via the chat feature and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. So, consistently selecting future high performers. Last month we talked about the attraction process and we have a high performance pipeline, and obviously the attraction process is the first step in that. Any of you that were attending last week, you'll probably remember my mantra of sort, which is that you cannot select the best person for the role if that best person does not apply for your job in the first place. I think out of the whole high performance pipeline, there's probably the least amount of attention and focus is given to the attraction side, and then probably to a large degree then to the selection side after that. But the attraction side is very important. If you weren't tuned in last week, please go to our websites and listen to that webinar. Hopefully that will be of benefit to you as well. So the traditional selection process, and it is used by the vast majority of hiring managers, HR, business owners around the world, and that is they screen on resumes, they place an ad, they screen on resumes, they have the first interview, then they have the second interview, then they do reference checking, and then they make an offer to what they believe is the best candidate that has come through the system. And why is a traditional selection process used? Well, a big part of it is, I've been doing it for 20 years. I've been selecting people for 20 years, and that's a process I'm very comfortable with. There's also I know how to pick them. The sad part of that is I know every manager that has said to me, I know how to pick them. When I've asked them how many people they have in their team that are high performers, how many adequate are very good, and how many not essentially substandard, is the results aren't as good as what they actually thought they should be. But the main reason why people keep using the traditional selection process is it's easy. The problem is it doesn't really deliver the results. It delivers very poor results. So what we want to go through this afternoon is how we can improve that process for you and allow you to, one, bring in far better people, and then also then to manage them to success. Because at the end of the day, every employee you employ and in the future, and the employees you currently have on board, they want to be successful. So why is a traditional selection process broken? Recent studies have shown that Australian managers only rate 25% of their high performers, 25% of their direct reports as being high performers. 50% they rate as adequate, which is adequate to very good, and then 25% are not yet competent. They're not achieving the minimum expectations. It's a pretty grim look, really, when you look at it. This is then backed up through employee engagement studies, where only 20% of employees are active promoters of their employer, of their business. There's 37% that are passive, and 43% are detractors. They're actually pulling the organisation back. They're saying things behind your back that are not very nice about your organisation and about your management team. 43% of detractors is a huge problem. We'd be unbelievably concerned if we had 43% of our clients that were detractors. People that work for us, that we're paying, and 43% of them are essentially pulling the company down, is not a healthy place to be. So we want to try and fix that. But why is it broken? Well, the reality is, by using the traditional recruitment process of resume, interview, and reference checking, you get a cumulative information, relevant information about a person in a role of 26%. You only get 26% of the relevant information using the traditional recruitment process. Inherently, 74% of the time, you're not going to get it right. And if we go back to here, it all now starts to make sense. So 26%, 25% of high performers, and then the other 76%, 74%, 75% of not yet competent through to good performers. So it's directly related in, and then we can see here 20% of promoters is in alignment with the 25% or 26% that actually work for us. So what would a perfect selection process deliver? And that's what we're all after. Well, the first thing is that all employees would be high performers. All employees would provide discretionary effort, and the best measure of employee engagement in an organisation is discretionary effort. So that's the best way of measuring whether an employee is engaged in the organisation, is they actually provide discretionary effort. All employees will be fully engaged and active promoters of their employer. Managers will be outstanding leaders and confident people managers. And if we get all those four right, then what we end up with is year-on-year positive growth in revenue, profitability and customer service levels. And the reality is every business owner, every management team, if they can deliver year-on-year, high year-on-year growth in revenue, profitability and customer service levels, they would all be very, very happy. So all of this comes down to employee engagement and leadership. So how can we get close to perfect? Well, the reality is, we look at the traditional recruitment process of the resume interview and reference checking, that 26%. You can see the cumulative effect from here of using personality testing, abilities testing, interest testing, and job matching, job fit, is essentially adding science into it. So it's the people analytics. So what we want to do is add science into the people side. The amazing thing that we see in the marketplace is nearly every organisation has embraced science for IT. They've embraced science for operations. They've embraced it for sales. They've embraced it for administration. But when you start talking about people, for selection of people, and for management of people, and for leadership, this area here is, which is all about science, is people are less willing to embrace it. I don't quite understand why that's the case, but there's obviously a fear there somewhere. And it's a fear that as business owners and managers we have to get over, because we're talking about here an increase in the success rate from 26% to 75%. It's not insubstantial. So getting close to the perfect. Well, skills, ability and knowledge testing is part of it. Essentially, we use skills testing to screen out the applicants that don't have the basic skills and knowledge for the job. In most cases, we don't necessarily recommend skills testing for above, for six-figure roles. And the reality is, it's not that it doesn't provide a benefit. It's just that for a lot of those roles, the candidates would view that simple skills battery testing is probably a little bit beneath them and the role that they're going for. And I understand that, and I get that. But certainly for all office roles, warehouse roles, anything to do with any role where it is up to $100,000, is skills testing will assist you to screen people out that don't have the basic skills and knowledge. Essentially, take the candidates out where you're essentially wasting time looking at their resume because they don't have the basic skills and knowledge. They don't have the level that you're willing to train to. There's another part here too. Obviously, a lot of people use personality testing, and while personality testing does give you a slight increase in the success rate in the selection side, the reality is it shouldn't be used in selection. And you don't have to take my word for it. If you go to the Myers-Briggs site in the US, the official site, is they put there that the Myers-Briggs assessment can be used to inform decisions through discussion, but it should never be used to hire, fire, promote people. And in addition to that DISC, and we have a DISC-based tool in our portfolio which we use for team balance and team analysis. But once again, don't listen to me, listen to DISC itself. is DISC is not recommended for pre-employment screening because it does not measure a specific skill, aptitude or factor specific to any position. So, where does it all come down to? And the reality is it comes down to measuring fit. And you would have all have heard about fit over the last, especially over the last 5-10 years. The study that really was the forerunner of reporting that fit was so important was the Harvard Business Review study. It studied 360,000 individuals across 20 years across 14 industries. And what they wanted to do was find out what you could use to predict future high performance within a role. And that's not just for the selection side, we're also talking about here for promotions within organisations and redeployment. It's all about, does the person that you're looking at putting into a role, whether internal or external, have the fit to be a future high performer? In that study, they measured 5 things. They measured educational qualifications, experience, age, gender and race. And what they found was not one of those 5 were statistical predictors of future high performance, which is a little bit scary when you look at that the resume essentially is a report on their experience and educational qualifications, and it does not provide a statistical predictor of success, coupled with the reality now that over 60% of all resumes carry blatant lies or untruths in them, so it's a difficult area to start off with. What they did find, though, through the study was that there was a statistical predictor of future high performance, and that was whether the person had fit for the role. And their definition of fit was whether they could handle the mental demands of the role, the people and the environment they work in, and they actually enjoy doing the job, which I think all makes sense. So what they found was that if you could measure fit of the total person, and by measuring their cognitive abilities, behavioural traits and interests, then you had a statistical predictor of success in measuring whether someone would be a future high performer within a role. So if we look at the traditional selection process versus what we believe you should be doing to make your selection process far more robust in the future. So essentially all of the things that are being done at the moment, they stay. The resume screening is very important. First interview, very important. Second interview, very important. And the reference checking, obviously very important. But what we want to do is inject into 3 areas some science that allows us to improve the end result of the selection process. So the first part is by developing high performance role benchmarks, and we'll go into how we develop them. Then we've got the online skills and knowledge screening, so essentially screening out the applicants that don't have the basic skills and knowledge for the job. And then in between the first interview and the second interview for the shortlisted candidates is assessing them and measuring them against the high performance role benchmark you developed at the start, measuring their fit and identifying any potential barriers to success. So that process there, the difference between the traditional process and our selection process, will take it from that 26% to 75%. So how can we measure fit? Well, we here use Profiles International assessments, job fit assessments, and there are some other assessments you can use, but these are the ones that we use. And what you can see here is that this is essentially the role benchmark. So we measure the cognitive abilities, learning index, the verbal skills, numerical skills, 9 of the behavioural traits, the key behavioural traits, and then the occupational interests. The important thing about these assessments are that they don't measure the displayed behaviour of a person, they measure the core hardwired behaviour. So they're the behaviours of people that they revert back to when they're under stress or a full relaxation. And because that's what we want to measure, we want to measure the jobs or measure the person against the roles so that their natural abilities and traits are perfectly in line with what the role requirements are. So you can see here with the role benchmark, the blue shaded areas, is that in a lot of assessments they will essentially say overtly or covertly that right-hand side of the scale is fantastic, left-hand side of the scale is not so good. That's not right. It's what the role requires is fantastic. Anywhere outside of that is a potential concern, whether you're left or right. And they're the areas that we want to drill down in to in the second interview. So you can see here in this role is they require people that are very low in manageability. So they're risk takers. You know, they're continually thinking outside the square of how to do something better. They require them where they're quite cynical, very low in attitude. So they're not optimistic people. They essentially have the black cap on and look at what's wrong with something before they look at what's right with something. They're very low on accommodating, so they stick their heels in. When they passionately believe in something, they will fight the fight. They'll stick their heels in and argue the fight. And then they're highly independent, so they're willing to be by themselves, go off by themselves, and quite comfortable with their own company. They're just some of the areas. So you can see here that for the role is you need to understand what are the attributes of your role. Now, what we do to develop these role benchmarks is we can assess proven high performers. So in this case, this benchmark was developed from proven high performers. So the top performers within the role, these were the attributes. These are their hardwired attributes, and that's what we want to replicate when we're in the selection process, either for recruitment selection or looking to promote people within this role to this role within an organisation. When we then assess people in between that first and second interview, what we're then able to do is to measure the person against the role benchmark, essentially against the high performers, against the people that you know are exceptionally good in this role. And you can see here where we can identify these potential barriers to success of this candidate versus what the high performers are. This gives us a huge insight into what areas we need to explore in the second interview to make sure that these potential barriers to success are actually manageable. Because if they're not manageable, then really you're potentially setting up an employee for failure right from day one, and we don't want to do that. And you can see down here the employee engagement side. You know, we all know that employee engagement is the game. Any organisation that increases employee engagement will increase revenue, profitability and customer service levels. So this part here measures the employee engagement of this potential employee to the role. So it's highly predictive. What we then are able to do within the interview guide is for all of the areas that are measured, is it once again provides you with what the role requires and what the person is. But then what it does is it then gives you some tailored behavioural interview questions for the hiring manager or HR, whoever's tasked with the selection process, to drill down into those areas to determine two things. One is that 6 right? And 2, is it manageable? So can we, with this individual, can we during the workday essentially make them operate more over here than where they naturally are? Now, in some cases, through the interview questions, we're trying to find out whether the person can modify their own behaviours, so whether they self-modify for this, or whether the manager, who the person will report to, can provide an environment to give them the confidence to be a bit more of a risk taker. These questions here help people to drill down into those areas. If you're already in HR, your behavioural interviewing skills may be exceptionally good. And if that being the case, this will take the grunt work out for you and allow you to use your skills to go in even deeper. For normal operational managers and hiring managers, is generally their interviewing skills aren't fantastic. They're not really good at developing their own behavioural interview questions, and they tend to want to find out whether they like the person, not whether the person's going to be great in the role. This makes them essentially go down the path of finding out whether the person will be great in the role, and gives them the interview questions that they need to be a confident interviewer in the second interview. Once you have then brought the person on board, what we then want to be able to do through using the high performance role benchmark and these job fit assessments is to be able to provide the management teams with the coaching, mentoring and training suggestions on how to manage the person from day one. One of the biggest challenges we have in organisations is, we give a 6-month probationary period. But in most cases, the managers don't start finding out what the person is like until after 3 months or 4 months, sometimes after 6 months. And the reality is we don't use that probationary period very well. Whereas with this, when we have essentially what the person is like here, and then suggestions on how to manage that, so essentially how to manage them from being a 6 to operating down here for most of the day, is it then gives those suggestions to the manager on how to do that far more effectively than they ever have before. What we're doing is getting managers to coach people and manage people the way they need to be coached and managed, not just shotgunning everybody with the same approach, because we know that doesn't work. It's a very powerful part of the job fit assessments that are used. So where do we get to? Well, essentially by adding science, by adding in fit, we get down to this 75%. So it's it's not perfect, but a 3 times improvement on where you currently are is not something to sneeze at. And the chances of a substandard performer getting through this process is incredibly remote, incredibly remote. I thought I'd just show you how powerful it can be by not only by developing the role benchmark, but also developing targeted job advertisements that use the attributes of top performers in the advertisement. So we're attracting people that have the same attributes and essentially answering that question, what's in it for me, and how that can impact in an organisation. So one of our clients, and this was a couple of years ago when this was done, Living Social, an online marketplace, very similar to Groupon in the way they operated. Groupon was the largest player in the market. When we first started working with them, they had a 13% market share and about 80 salespeople in their contact centre. So this was a situation they had before they conducted the role benchmark, targeted job advertisement, and then used the interview guides going forward. Their job ads were getting incredibly poor responses. The response died within 24 hours. They were lucky to get 10 applications per month. But what was even worse was 66% of their new hires were failing within a short period of time. And it was taking 6 months for the rest of them to become productive, essentially to pay for themselves. All of this meant with that high turnover rate and this long lead time to get people productive and get them off ramp, the employer brand was not very good. The employees were trashing the employer brand online in the different websites. It wasn't a happy place to be. So after we then benchmarked the high performers, developed a targeted job advertisement, and employed the interview guides, this is what happened. And this happened from day one. So the job ads response rate increased 7 times. So there were 69 applications per ad. And it wasn't just the number of applications, it was the quality of the applicants was substantially higher than it had ever been before. And you can see that here where 80% of the new hires, one, there was no turnover of that 80%, but they were hitting off ramp targets within 3 months. So they're hitting it very high. So whereas before it was taking 6 months, 80% of them were hitting to become productive within 3 months, a substantial increase. All of that resulted within 2 months of implementing this of a 6% increase in the market share of their organisation versus their main competitor. So pretty stunning results. That is all I have to say. I hope that has been beneficial. I'm just going to check to see if there's any questions here. We've got a bit of time for questions. I have got one here. Sorry, 2 questions here. The question is, you mentioned a total person picture. What do you mean by this form? What do you mean by this from a hiring perspective? The important thing about the total person is essentially it is a little bit like measuring the heart, mind and soul of a person. So you have your position description, that measures what the job does. It doesn't give you an insight into the type of person that you need to do that job exceptionally well. And to measure the total person is we've got to be able to measure their cognitive skills, their core hardwired behaviours and their interests, what they actually enjoy doing. Because if they're not in alignment in those 3 areas, for what the role requires, then you've potentially got early failure rate or non-success in the role staring you in the face. The total person is a really important part of when you're looking at people coming in. You can't just look at their cognitive skills, you can't just look at their occupational interests, you need to look at all three to get a total picture of that person in the role. And I've got another question here with regards to the predictive reliability percentage of these assessment tools. At what point do you accept, reject a job candidate? It's a very good question. With them, probably best to give you my experience over the last 14 years of using these assessments. I don't think I've ever seen a high performer that's had less than a 75% match to the role. Now, within that, I've got to give a little bit of extra depth there. I have in sales roles seen a salesperson that is one of their top salespeople as far as revenue is concerned that's had less than 75% fit. But when we have asked the organisation, the sales manager, would you like another person like that, their answer has always been an emphatic no. So they are a little bit outliers where generally, I've only ever seen it in sales, where they're amazing salespeople in generating results. But the problem is they're either unbelievably difficult to manage, or when the wheels come off, they leave devastation behind them, and it can be a huge problem. So for all other situations, the reality is we work on 80% is a good match, then very good, excellent, outstanding from there. But you've got to look at what the scores are in the report. So I'll just go back to here. So you could have a high match, or you could have a match of 89%, where the candidate is exactly in the blue area, in the benchmark in every area other than one. And that one, though, if it's not manageable, then it doesn't matter that they're 89% match, because you can't manage that area. We had one example, and this is a year or so ago, where the high performers were all 8 to 10 in independence. And they had this applicant that had matched every other area, cognitive, interests, all the behavioural except for one. His independence was a 1. And when the client rang up and said, what do we do? I said, well, can you manage for that? And this was a sales rep out in the road. And after a minute of them thinking about it, they said, can't manage for that. And I said, no, unfortunately, you can't. And so it is about those potential barriers to success of whether you can manage them or not. And so you've got to look at each one individually, not just look at the overall percentage match and say that will, and go off that. We don't want these tools to be a tick the box. These are tools that are designed to help HR and hiring managers to select better people and retain better people, and to better understand what the roles require. So we're out of time. I thank you all very much. If you do have any further questions, please register them via the chat feature there, and we'll answer them offline. We'll get the answers to you offline. Please feel free to engage with us via the business and social media sites. If you have any other queries at all, don't hesitate to give us a call on our main line, 02 99 36 9000. But thank you for your attendance, and have a great day.